Hey friends, welcome back. Today we're jumping right back into some entitled people stories. Today we've got 3 entitled people stories, and while they happen in totally different places, a workplace, a storefront, and a quiet neighborhood, they all revolve around the same dangerous idea, that if something was allowed once, it's owed forever. And if you push back, you're the problem. Let's put them side by side. I quit my restaurant job after my boss yelled at an injured employee. This happened back in 2009 when I was waiting tables at an upscale steakhouse that loved to market itself as classy while operating like a psychological warfare experiment. The food was good, the wine list was solid, the prices were high, and the tips reflected that. That was the only reason anyone stayed, because the owner, Gary, was an absolute nightmare. Gary ran the place like a tyrant with a coke habit. Before every single shift, we were required to line up in the dining room while he paced back and forth, red-faced and already angry, just to scream at us. He'd tell us how lucky we were that he'd hired us, how we were all terrible at our jobs, and how no other restaurant would ever take us if we left. It didn't matter if you'd been there a week or 5 years. According to Gary, we were all useless, lazy, and replaceable. He loved reminding us of that. The irony was that he couldn't keep staff to save his life, and anyone with fine dining experience knew his reputation well enough to avoid him unless they were desperate. On top of being verbally abusive, Gary was also unbelievably cheap. The kitchen was full of little hazards he refused to fix, burners that didn't ignite properly, shelving that wobbled, floors that stayed slick because he wouldn't pay for proper mats. The worst of it was this massive 6-foot-tall dessert cooler that sat against the wall. The door had been broken for months. One hinge was barely holding on, and the door sagged at a dangerous angle. Every server knew to open it carefully, like you were defusing a bomb. We'd all complained. We'd all told him it was an accident waiting to happen. Gary's response was always the same. Don't slam it, and it'll be fine. Fixing it, apparently, was an unacceptable expense. Saturday night proved him wrong. We were deep into a brutal dinner rush. Every table was full, the kitchen was backed up, and everyone was moving fast just to keep up. One of the servers went to grab a dessert, opened the cooler like she'd done 100 times before, and the hinge finally gave out. The entire door ripped free and slammed into her head, hard. She went down immediately, hitting the floor and not getting back up. There was blood, a lot of it. Everything froze for a split second. Someone shouted for towels, someone else yelled for a manager. Gary came charging in, took one look at her lying on the floor, bleeding and clearly stunned, and instead of calling for help or showing even a shred of concern, he lost his mind. "Way to go," he screamed down at her. "Just brilliant. What the F am I supposed to do now? It's the middle of rush, you've got a full section, and now everyone's gonna have to cover for you because nobody in this place can do their GD job without screwing everything up. You should have been more careful." Yelling at an employee bleeding on the floor from an injury caused by his own negligence was a truth bomb. It showed everyone that his cruelty wasn't a management style, it was his genuine character, and it wasn't going to change. She was still on the floor, bleeding, shocked. Someone was trying to press towels to her head while Gary stood there ranting about table coverage and lost revenue. I'd seen him be cruel before, but this crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Watching him scream at an injured employee for getting hurt by equipment he refused to fix flipped a switch in me. I knew right then and there that I was done. No notice, no trying to be professional. I was finished. I finished my shift because I needed the money, but the second I got home that night, I sat down at my computer and wrote him a letter. Not a polite resignation, a detailed, blistering explanation of exactly why I was quitting. I laid out his constant verbal abuse, the hostile work environment, the dangerous conditions in the kitchen, and his behavior toward the injured server. I didn't hold back. I didn't soften a single word. Then I printed 30 copies. The next day, I came in early for my opening shift. The restaurant was quiet, empty, peaceful in that eerie pre-dinner way. Gary wasn't there yet. Perfect. I spent the next hour turning the place into a scavenger hunt of consequences. I slipped letters into menus, tucked them under folded napkins, hid them between stacks of paper towels in the restrooms. Some went in obvious spots, but others I placed carefully in places that wouldn't be found right away. I wanted them popping up days later, weeks later, little reminders that he couldn't erase. When I was done, instead of clocking in or waiting for the pre-shift lineup, I walked out the front door and never went back. A few days later, a coworker texted me, absolutely delighted. Gary had found the first letter mid-service. A table read it, called him over, and asked if it was true. Another table found one shortly after and walked out before ordering. Apparently, you could hear him screaming from the dining room. Full volume meltdown, slamming doors, ranting about betrayal. The best part was that it didn't stop. Letters kept appearing in menus and bathrooms, under plates. Every time one surfaced, Gary would turn purple, disappear into his office, and slam the door so hard the walls shook. They were still finding them weeks later. Each discovery was like lighting the fuse all over again. I heard that he tried to blame other servers, threatened write-ups, and accused people of sabotaging him. No one confessed, and I was long gone by then. My legacy lived on quietly, ruining his day again and again. To this day, it remains one of my proudest moments. I don't regret a thing. My only regret is that I wasn't there to watch his face every single time another letter surfaced, reminding him that no amount of screaming could undo what he'd done, or how many people were finally done with him. The genius of hiding the letters was the timeline. You created a series of time bombs. Every new discovery was a fresh eruption of shame and anger, proving that his behavior had consequences that couldn't be swept away. It was a slow burn revenge that turned your final act into a lasting legend among the staff and a recurring nightmare for him. And our second story. I was written up for being 6 minutes late. I've always been the kind of person who shows up early, not on time, not sliding in at the last second, but early enough to breathe, settle in, and start the day without my heart rate spiking. I hate the stress of rushing. I hate watching the clock. I hate that feeling of cutting it close, so I build buffers into everything. Always have. Back when this story happened, my commute was about half an hour on the highway. Straight shot, nothing fancy. But highways are unpredictable, and I knew that. Because of that, I left my house a full hour before my shift started. Every single day, even though I only needed 30 minutes. I like knowing that I had room for accidents, weather, construction, or whatever nonsense the road decided to throw at me. Part of that routine included stopping for coffee. Same place, same order every morning. I'd grab it, get on the highway, put on some music, and just ease into the day. Most mornings, I still arrived at work 20 to 30 minutes early. I'd sip the rest of my coffee, check emails, and start working when my shift actually began. No drama, no issues, no complaints. Until one morning when the highway completely imploded. I'm not talking about a minor slowdown or a couple brake lights. I mean full-on dead-stop traffic jam that came out of nowhere. Lanes closed, cars barely inching forward, no exits in sight. By the time I finally crawled through it and got off the highway, I knew my buffer had been eaten alive. I pulled into the parking lot, glanced at the clock, and felt that familiar drop in my stomach. I was 6 minutes late. 6. I grabbed my things, walked inside, and before I could even sit down, my supervisor zeroed in on me, loudly, publicly, with an audience. Well, he said, raising his voice just enough to draw attention. Look at that. Guess your morning coffee was more important than getting to work on time, huh? A few people looked over, a couple awkward chuckles. I froze for a second, then tried to explain. I bought the coffee before I knew there was a traffic jam, I said. There was a major delay on the highway. He cut me off immediately. Excuses. You stroll in late with coffee in your hand and expect everyone else to pick up the slack? That's disrespectful. I tried again, calmer this time. I leave an hour early every day. I'm almost always early. This was out of my control. Didn't matter. He wasn't interested in context. He wasn't interested in my track record. He wanted to make a point. He grabbed a write-up form, filled it out, and slapped it down. Policy is policy, he said. 5 minutes late or more gets written up. That part was technically true. The policy said anything under 5 minutes late was fine, but 5 minutes or more could result in discipline. What the policy also said, quietly, was that supervisors were encouraged to use discretion and not penalize employees who weren't habitual offenders. I was about as far from habitually late as you could get. Still didn't matter. I signed the write-up, sat down, and worked my shift with that bitter feeling sitting in my chest all day. It wasn't about the piece of paper. It was about being humiliated over something so small, especially when I'd gone out of my way for years to be reliable. A couple weeks later, it happened again. Another traffic issue. Not as bad as the first one, but bad enough that I could tell I wasn't going to make it on time. I checked the clock while still stuck on the highway and did the math. 15 minutes late, give or take. That's when something in my brain clicked. I thought about that write-up. I thought about how 6 minutes late it earned me the same punishment as someone who rolled in hours late. I thought about how my supervisor made it very clear that effort, consistency, and circumstances meant absolutely nothing to him. And I realized something important. If the penalty was the same either way, there was no incentive to rush. So I took the next exit. Instead of white-knuckling it through traffic, I pulled into a little diner just off the highway, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths, laminated menus, and the smell of bacon hanging permanently in the air. I parked, walked in, and sat down. The waitress smiled and asked what I wanted. I ordered a full breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. Real coffee, not something chugged under stress. I ate slowly. I read the paper. I refilled my mug. I actually relaxed. 2 hours later, I paid the bill, got back in my car, and drove to work. By the time I walked in, I was 2.5 hours late. My supervisor saw me, narrowed his eyes, and called me into his office. He didn't yell this time. He didn't need to. He just filled out another write-up and slid it across the desk. Late is late, he said. Policy. I signed it without argument. The look on his face when he realized I wasn't upset was almost worth the whole thing. Your realization was pure genius. If the punishment for 6 minutes late is identical to 3 hours late, then the rational choice is to stop stressing and just accept the punishment on your own terms. By stopping for breakfast, you took back control of your time and your stress. You turned his inflexible punishment into a personal perk. He couldn't punish you more, so you punished him with your calm indifference. From that point on, my routine didn't really change. 99% of the time, I still showed up early. Same coffee, same buffer, same reliability. But every now and then, when traffic decided to turn my commute into a disaster and I knew I'd crossed that 5-minute line, I stopped fighting it. I was going to get punished anyway. I might as well enjoy myself. Sometimes it was breakfast. Sometimes it was a long coffee break. Once I even went home, fed my cat, and watched an episode of a show before heading in. Every single time, the outcome was the same. One write-up, identical to the one I got for being 6 minutes late. My supervisor never said a word about it. He couldn't. He'd painted himself into a corner with his own rigidity. Eventually, I moved on to a better job with a better manager who understood that adults don't need to be treated like children over minutes on a clock. But to this day, I still think about that diner breakfast whenever someone insists on enforcing rules without common sense. If you're going to punish effort the same way you punish indifference, don't be surprised when people stop rushing for your approval and start ordering bacon instead. And our last story. HOA Karen decided she could humiliate a 79-year-old grandpa with fines, and then she banned him from doing his hobby in his own garage. She thought he was an easy target, but they didn't expect one thing. HOA versus lawyer. My grandpa Ray is 79, and he's the kind of person you literally can't picture being angry. He doesn't know how to make a scene. He doesn't know how to demand things. He even says the word problem like he's apologizing for it. He's lived in the same house for almost 40 years. When he and my grandma first moved in, it was a simple neighborhood. Kids on bikes, lawns that looked like everyone else's, zero drama. The HOA, everyone around here basically calls it the building committee, showed up much later. First as a symbolic organization, then as a trash pickup fee, and a few years after that, it turned into a tiny empire of stamps, fines, and people who dream of running other people's lives. My grandma's been gone for 4 years now, but before that, they had this one amazing tradition. Grandma loved hunting for old furniture online. Not antique pieces for thousands, but those tired, scratched-up dressers and nightstands people sell for pennies just to get someone to haul them away. She could sit up half the night on her phone, excited like a kid. Right, look, a dresser for $20. Can you imagine? It's real wood, not that cardboard they sell now. And Grandpa would smile, pour her tea, and say, of course, we're furniture rescuers. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Then he dragged the piece into the garage, and that's where his happiness started. He wasn't just Grandpa, he was a craftsman. Sanding, gluing, fitting drawers, touching up stains, swapping out handles. The garage smelled like wood and varnish, and sometimes like old stories. Grandma would take before and after photos and sell everything on Marketplace. It was never really a business in the money-making sense. It was their shared life, their little project that kept them young. After Grandma died, Grandpa tried not to stop. He said that when he worked with his hands, it was easier to breathe. And right at that moment, she showed up in our neighborhood, the new HOA president. Of course, her name was Karen. I'm not joking. And yes, she lived up to it as perfectly as a violation notice lives up to your mailbox. She was the kind of person who said property values like it was her child's name. She always had a folder, always. Even when she went out for a simple walk, that folder was in her hands like a weapon. The first hit was so petty that I honestly thought it was a prank. Grandpa showed me the letter. His hands were shaking a little. They say my mailbox is the wrong color, he said quietly. What? I read it. Mailbox color is not HOA-approved shade. You have 7 days to correct. After 7 days, $50 a day fine. I looked at his mailbox. It was brown. Not neon, not hot pink, just brown. Like most mailboxes on planet Earth. Grandpa, this is nonsense, I said. Just ignore it. I don't like problems, he replied. And of course, he didn't change anything because he didn't realize their idea of shade basically meant the exact halftone. A week later, he already had $300 in fines. The next day, Karen came in person. I happened to be at Grandpa's house because something about it felt off enough that I wanted to be there. She didn't say hello. She just lifted her chin and said, Mr. Ray, you received notice. You did not comply. Now there's a fine. Grandpa swallowed air. I didn't know it was that important. Rules are rules, she snapped, and then turned to me. And who are you? I'm his grandson, and I want to understand. Are you seriously fining a 79-year-old man over the shade of his mailbox? Karen looked at me like I'd asked if taxes were optional. If he cannot maintain neighborhood standards, she said coldly, then maybe he shouldn't live here. The HOA can place a lien on the house. Something clicked in my head. You know that feeling when someone crosses a line so cleanly without even realizing it that there's no going back? Grandpa said softly, I'll pay, just please don't. Karen smiled, one of those little smiles people wear when they love power. And that's when the second episode started, the real one. Because Karen noticed a dresser in the garage missing its doors, a sander, and a little can of varnish. And what's this? Her voice got sweeter. Dangerous sweet. I restore furniture, Grandpa said. And in that there was so much pride and shame at the same time that I wanted to throw her out of the yard. Karen immediately pulled out her folder. Commercial activity prohibited. Home businesses are not allowed. You're using your garage as a workshop. That is a violation. It's not a business, Grandpa protested quietly. It's a hobby. My wife, we used to... If he wants to run a furniture shop, he can rent a warehouse, she cut him off. This isn't a retirement workshop. That sentence hit harder than the fines. Grandpa went pale. I watched him physically shrink, shoulders dropping, hands pulling closer to his body. And then I did something I almost never do. I smiled. Okay, I said, you want rules? Go get rules. I paid the mailbox fine because I didn't want them messing with Grandpa's house paperwork with a lien. But that night, I took every HOA document Grandpa had stuffed in his important drawer and read them from the first page to the last. I read like it was the instructions for a life-saving medication, and I found it. In our documents, there were a few weird clauses left over from when the neighborhood was first being developed. Stuff about accessory structures, permitted building types, and, most interestingly, a lot about the lot next door to Karen's house. Turns out the empty lot beside her, this neglected patch that had sat there for years, wasn't technically inside the HOA the way the others were. It had been left as a separate parcel back in the day, and it was now owned by an investor who didn't even live here. The HOA could recommend, but they couldn't fully control it if the construction followed city code. And that's when a plan formed in my head. So clean, it practically glowed. I found the owner through a realtor. The guy replied bluntly, if you want it, buy it. I don't care. I just want to close out this asset. I purchased it through an LLC, totally normal, nothing shady. I didn't want Karen starting meetings and petitions before the papers were signed. A month later, the lot was mine. And 2 months after that, I filed permits to build a small standalone workshop. Not a factory, not a business center, just a neat, code-compliant building with a proper foundation, soundproofing, ventilation, and good lighting. On paper, it was called a private hobby workshop. The best revenge is when it looks like bureaucracy. When construction started, Karen ran over to the lot on day 3. I was standing by the fence with coffee like I was just enjoying the morning. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "You don't have the right. This will lower property values." I held up my folder. Yes, I had a folder now too, a very nice one. "Here are the permits, here are the approvals, here are the inspections, everything's legal. The HOA won't allow it." "The HOA can write letters," I said calmly. "The city issues permits." Karen pressed her lips into a thin line. This will be considered commercial use." "No," I said, "this is a private workshop, a hobby. Like Grandpa's was, only now not in his garage." And that's when it hit her. She realized I wasn't just being stubborn. I built her a mirror. The next few weeks were beautiful. Not because it was loud. I did everything as correctly as possible. Work started exactly when the law allowed. No 6 a.m. nonsense, no blasting music, just steady legal construction. But HOAs love drama. Karen sent warnings every week, demanded construction be stopped, called emergency meetings, threatened lawsuits. I answered with one thing only: copies of the permits and a single sentence. "We are compliant with city code." And you know what happened next? The neighbors suddenly started reading the HOA rules. Actually reading them, because when Karen tries to drown someone, she's always got 10 more violations chained up for everyone else. Someone's porch light was not approved, someone's bushes were too tall, someone got threatened with a fine for storing a child's scooter in the yard. People got angry. Karen started losing. One day she came to me, not yelling for the first time without her folder, just the face of someone who realized she'd picked the wrong hill to die on. "We need to find a compromise," she said. "I'm listening." You could sell the lot or stop these projects. The HOA is willing to reconsider your grandfather's situation." I looked at her and felt this weird calm. "The compromise is simple," I said. "You cancel every fine you issued my grandpa, you put it in writing that his hobby wasn't a business, and you resign." Karen's mouth fell open. "That's blackmail." "No," I said, "that's rules. Rules are rules." She left, slamming the gate like the gate owed her money. 2 weeks later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. I didn't come for the show, I came for the ending. The room was packed with neighbors who were tired of being background characters in Karen's life. She sat at the front table, pale as paper. The HOA lawyer spoke first, dry and blunt. "The chances of winning in court are minimal. The costs are significant." Then the question started. Not for me, for her. "Why were you finding an old man over a mailbox? Why are you snooping in people's garages? How much has the HOA spent on lawyers in the last 2 months?" Karen tried to talk about standards, but her words didn't work anymore, because standards aren't humiliating a widower over his hobby. When the vote came for re-election, she lost so fast she didn't even have time to get offended. She just gathered her papers and walked out without looking at anyone. The next day, Grandpa got a letter. Fines canceled. One line said, "Apology for inconvenience." Soulless, but I didn't care. In another document, the HOA revised the wording about hobby use so nobody could pull this game again. And the best part came a week later when the workshop was finished. I brought Grandpa to the new building, clean floor, workbench, shelving, lighting like a dream shop. I even hung a small sign on the door, "Ray's Workshop." Grandpa stood there silent, running his hand across the smooth wood of the table, and I saw his lips start to tremble. "This is too much," he whispered. "No, Grandpa," I said, "this is exactly enough. You have the right to live in a way that makes breathing easier." He nodded, then let out a quiet laugh. She would have found a spot for a photo corner in here," he said about Grandma, "and she would have made me do the dresser in trend." I laughed too, and for the first time in a long time, my chest unclenched. That evening, he brought in an old dresser Grandma had bought years ago for later and started restoring it, slowly, carefully, like a prayer. A few months later, I sold the lot for a profit because, yes, it increased in value after development. The new owner was a decent person. He liked the idea of the workshop and kept it as is, with a lease agreement for Grandpa at a symbolic rent. Because sometimes this kind of story comes with a bonus level of justice. I heard one more thing about Karen. She tried to lead a committee in another neighborhood, but her name was already known. And this time, people read the rules before she could pull out her folder. And Grandpa never repainted the mailbox. We just bought him a new one, exactly the same shade, with a small plaque on the side, 79 years, still compliant. And every time I visit, Grandpa shows me the next restored table and says with that same quiet, stubborn calm, "See, my hands still work. Means I'm still here." And honestly, that was the real revenge. Not the workshop, not the fines, not Karen's resignation. And that's the thing about power-hungry HOA Karens. They don't enforce rules to keep order. They enforce them to feel important. But when you try to crush a good man over something petty, you might find out the hard way that someone else is willing to play by your rules better than you. And thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.